All right, Deuteronomy 28, let's call this one top to the bottom because it's a contrast to what we saw back in chapter 26 where he charted their path from the bottom to the top. Why is that? Well, as we already mentioned, in the beginning of the chapter, the very first verse, actually, he is going to say, look, he has plans to exalt them above all the nations of the earth if they can stay off of the path of three other nations. Egypt, a nation that fell at the heights of its oppression of Israel. Canaan, a nation that was being cast out in part because its people have become so ambitious that they've begun to sacrifice their own kids in order to get ahead. And then Sodom and Gomorrah, a city that had become so preoccupied with its own pleasure that there didn't really seem to be any limits on who they were willing to exploit. All three of these nations have experienced some degree of decline, of course, total devastation in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah. And because we've already said God has emphasized over and over his impartiality in many ways. Not only is he telling them if they do not stay off of the path of these three nations that they're going to fall, he's literally going to say they're going to go back to where they started, except this time they're going to wish for slavery because they're going to have fallen to such a low depth that they are going to try to sell themselves into slavery and there are going to be no buyers. And so understand, we talked about in the previous chapter, the whole point of these warnings is to have you in a position where you can rejoice without regret. But ultimately, it's not always bad to have regrets and rejoicing, especially to the degree, as we see in two places, one Proverbs and in Hebrews. It reminds us that God disciplines those whom he loves. And so if he puts us in a position of privilege, he's going to do that understanding that none of us is perfect. And so no matter how much he's refined our character, there are ways in which we can just mess it up. And we can have regrets in the middle of times when we should otherwise be rejoicing. But that's not always so bad, because what's even worse are times when God allows us to simply go on rejoicing in times when we really should be regretting, because he simply left us to continue to walk a path that leads from the top all the way back down to the bottom.